We like the beginning of the story. A coat of many colors. A teenage boy with a dream. We like the end of the story. A chariot in Egypt. A family reunited. A nation saved. Most of the time, we read the life of Joseph as a straight line from the pit to the palace. We treat the middle chapters as if they are just an unfortunate interruption, a waiting room, a delay, but we rush through the silence. And yet, the biblical text does not rush. The text slows down in the dark. Between the dream in Canaan and the throne in Egypt lies a space that most people prefer to skip. The dungeon. It is a space where the dreams seem to have died, where the promise seems to have failed, where God seems to have forgotten the very boy he chose. That sounds like a tragic detour. It is not. It is the exact path forward. When we meet Joseph in Genesis chapter 37, he is 17 years old. He is favored. He is gifted, and he knows it. He has dreams of his brothers bowing down to him, and he does not hesitate to tell them. He is given a beautiful coat, a mark of authority and affection, and he wears it proudly in front of the brothers who despise him. The young Joseph is not just a dreamer. He is a boy carrying a divine promise, but he does not yet have the character to hold it. He has the vision, but not the weight. So the stripping begins. His brothers strip him of that coat. They throw him into a pit. They pull him out only to sell him into the hands of passing merchants. He arrives in Egypt, stripped of his family, his status, and his home. He is purchased by a high-ranking official named Potiphar. And just when it seems Joseph is climbing back up, just when his hard work brings him favor and authority in Potiphar's house, it is taken from him again. Falsely accused, his cloak is left behind, and he is thrown into the royal prison. This is where the story seems to stall, or at least that is what we assume. We often assume the prison is a pause button on the plan of God. We think God gave Joseph a dream, human cruelty got in the way, and God had to figure out a rescue operation. But the narrative of Genesis is doing something much deeper. The prison is not a holding cell. It is an incubator. The dream of leadership requires a leader who can carry the immense weight of power without being crushed by his own ego. If the 17-year-old boy from Canaan had been handed the throne of Egypt immediately, he would have destroyed himself. He would have ruled with the same arrogance that alienated his brothers. God was not just preparing a place in Egypt for Joseph. He was using the prison to prepare Joseph for the place. The pit stripped away his coat, but the prison was designed to strip away his pride. But the text is doing something even more surprising here. It is about to show us that the darkest chapter of Joseph's life was not marked by absence. It was marked by a strange, unsettling presence. And the words the writer of Genesis uses to describe Joseph in the dungeon create a paradox that changes how we see the whole story. When the doors of the royal prison close behind Joseph, we expect the narrative to plunge into darkness. We expect the language to shift from promise to despair. But it does not. Instead, Genesis chapter 39 gives us one of the most jarring contrasts in all of Scripture. In verse 20, Joseph is taken and put into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. It is a total loss of freedom, a complete destruction of his reputation. But immediately, in verse 21, the text adds a stunning detail. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. That phrase, "the Lord was with Joseph," is not new. It appeared just a few verses earlier when Joseph was sold to Potiphar as a slave. And its repetition here creates a profound theological tension. Most of the time, we equate the presence of God with deliverance. We assume that if God is with someone, he will immediately pull them out of their suffering. If God is present, the prison doors should swing open. But the text presents a harder, deeper reality. God's presence does not always mean immediate rescue. Sometimes, God's presence is the very thing that sustains a person in the exact place they are desperately trying to escape. God was with Joseph, not by breaking him out, but by going into the dungeon with him. The text says, God showed him steadfast love. In Hebrew, this is hesed, the word for covenant loyalty. The writer is making sure the reader knows that God has not abandoned the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That covenant is still active, even in an Egyptian cell. And the result of that presence is entirely unexpected. The keeper of the prison notices something different about this young Hebrew. He begins to hand over responsibility. Soon, Joseph is put in charge of all the prisoners who are in the dungeon. The text says that whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Success. In a dungeon, it is a complete paradox. But it is also the exact training ground the young dreamer needed. Think back to the 17-year-old boy in Canaan. He wanted to rule. He expected people to bow down to him. His vision of leadership was standing above his brothers while wearing a coat that proved he was special. Now look at him in the prison. He is learning how to lead, but he is doing it from the absolute bottom. He is not ruling over wealthy merchants or royal officials. He is managing a dark, miserable pit of forgotten men. He is learning how to organize, how to administer, and how to serve people who have nothing to offer him in return. The arrogance is being slowly burned away. The ego is being systematically dismantled. The boy who demanded attention in his father's tent is learning how to work in complete obscurity. He is becoming a man capable of carrying power without being poisoned by it. And all the while, the text insists that the Lord was with him. To modern ears, that sounds like the story is about to turn around. He is in charge of the prison. He has proven his character. Deliverance must be close. But the next scene introduces a twist that makes the waiting even harder. The twist begins when the heavy doors of the prison open, not to let Joseph out, but to let two new prisoners in. These are not ordinary criminals. They are high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's own court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. For some unstated reason, the king of Egypt is furious with them, and he throws them into the exact same dungeon where Joseph is confined. And suddenly, the narrative brings back the one thing that has been missing since Joseph was 17 years old: dreams. One morning, Joseph walks in to check on these two officials, and he notices that their faces are downcast. Pause for a second and look at that detail. The 17-year-old Joseph from chapter 37 was so entirely self-absorbed that he could not see the growing hatred on his own brothers' faces. But the Joseph in the dungeon notices the quiet sadness of two Egyptian strangers. The prison is working. Empathy is growing. He asks them why they are sad, and they give an answer that must have felt like a dagger to Joseph's heart. They say, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." Think about the profound irony of this moment. Joseph is in a pit because of his own dreams. His dreams cost him his beautiful coat, his family, his homeland, and his freedom. His dreams are the source of his deepest trauma. And now, he is forced to stand in a cell and listen to the dreams of someone else. It is a test of the heart. Will he grow bitter? Will he refuse to help? Will he say that he is done with dreams forever? Instead, Joseph says something that reveals exactly how much the dungeon has changed him. He asks, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Years earlier, Joseph paraded his dreams in front of his family as if he were the center of the universe. Now, he deflects the glory entirely to God. The men tell their stories. The cupbearer dreams of a vine with 3 branches, squeezing fresh grapes into Pharaoh's cup. The baker dreams of 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating the baked goods. Joseph delivers the interpretations without hesitation. In 3 days, the cupbearer will be restored to his royal position. In 3 days, the baker will be executed. But right after giving the cupbearer the good news of his coming freedom, Joseph makes a sudden, desperate plea. The stoic, successful manager of the prison drops his guard. He begs the cupbearer to remember him when it is well. He asks him to show kindness and mention him to Pharaoh, to get him out of this dark house. He insists he was stolen from the land of the Hebrews and has done nothing to deserve this pit. It is a raw, agonizing cry for help. Joseph is not a superhero who enjoys the dungeon. He is an exhausted man who just wants to go home. He asks the cupbearer for kindness. The Hebrew word he uses is hesed. He is asking a pagan official for the same covenant loyalty that God has been quietly showing him. Joseph has solved the mystery. He has given the true interpretation. He makes his one simple, desperate request. Deliverance is finally within reach. The cupbearer is going back to the palace, holding the literal key to Joseph's freedom. And what happens next is one of the most heartbreaking phrases in the book of Genesis. The cupbearer goes back to the palace. The baker goes to the gallows. Everything happens exactly as Joseph said it would. The young Hebrew has successfully unlocked the mystery. He has proven his gift. He has made his desperate plea for mercy. All that is left is for the cupbearer to speak a single sentence to Pharaoh. But the final verse of Genesis chapter 40 delivers a crushing blow. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That sentence is one of the heaviest moments in the entire narrative. Imagine the days that followed. Imagine Joseph in the dungeon, watching the heavy doors. Every morning, when the guards came down the stone steps, he must have stood up. He must have thought that today was the day the royal pardon would finally arrive. But the days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. The door stayed locked. The cupbearer was back in the palace, surrounded by sunlight, wine, and power, and he completely erased the Hebrew slave from his mind. Then, the writer of Genesis places a profound marker in the text. Chapter 41, verse 1 begins with a timestamp. After 2 whole years, in Hebrew, the phrase is literally 2 years of days. It is an expression that emphasizes the slow, agonizing, relentless passing of time. Not just 24 months, day after day after day. Over 700 days of waking up in a pit, knowing you have been abandoned. By this point, Joseph is approaching 30 years old. He was 17 when his brothers threw him into the dry well in Canaan. He has spent over a decade in slavery and imprisonment. The prime years of his youth have been completely consumed by suffering. We have to ask why. Why would the narrative do this? If the point of the prison was to humble Joseph, had that not already happened? He was managing the dungeon and serving others. He had already refused to take credit for the dreams, giving the glory entirely to God. He seemed ready. Why let him sit in the dark for 2 more years? Because human nature is deeply stubborn. Think about how Joseph tried to escape. He used his gift to secure a political favor. He placed his ultimate hope in the cupbearer. If the cupbearer had gone straight to Pharaoh on the first day, and Pharaoh had released Joseph, how would the story have changed? Joseph would have owed his freedom to an Egyptian official. He might have walked out of that prison believing that his own cleverness, his own networking, and his own ability to interpret a dream had orchestrated his rescue. He would have been a free man, but he would have been a man indebted to the political system of Egypt. God was not going to let Joseph's deliverance come through a human middleman. God was going to orchestrate a rescue so sudden and so undeniable that Joseph would know exactly who opened the door. But to get there, Joseph had to let go of his final lifeline. He had to watch his last human hope fail completely. He had to run out of options. The silence of those 2 full years was not a mistake. It was the final, necessary stage of his preparation. The boy who once trusted in his father's favor and the young man who placed his hope in a royal cupbearer had to become a man who trusted in absolutely nothing but the invisible presence of God. Pause for a second and look at the timeline. This is not just an unfortunate lapse of memory by a royal official. This delay is doing specific theological work in the life of Joseph. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random sequence of cruel events. The pit was not an accident. The false accusation was not a failure of God's protection. The forgotten promise of the cupbearer was not a mistake. Every step of this descent has been a deliberate dismantling of the 17-year-old boy and the slow, careful construction of a savior for the ancient world. We see the timeline in the book of Genesis, but we do not fully understand the theology of that timeline until we read the book of Psalms. Centuries later, Israel's worship writers looked back at the story of Joseph, and Psalm 105 reveals exactly what was happening in the dark during those 2 full years of silence. The psalm says, God sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with fetters and placed his neck in an iron collar. The boy who once wore the coat of many colors was now wearing an iron collar. But then comes verse 19. It is the key that unlocks the entire Egyptian prison sequence. Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him. Look at that phrasing carefully. The word of the Lord tested him. In modern English, a test is an exam. You answer questions, and you either pass or fail. If you get the right answers, you move on. But the Hebrew word used here is much heavier. The word is tsaraf. It is a metallurgical term. It means to smelt, to refine, to melt down metal in a blazing furnace until the impurities burn away and the pure silver or gold is left behind. The psalm is telling us that the promise God gave Joseph was not just a future destination. The promise itself was the fire. The dream of ruling was actively burning away everything inside Joseph that made him unfit to rule. He was refined by the jealousy of his brothers. He was refined by the temptation in Potiphar's house. He was refined by the darkness of the dungeon. And finally, he was refined by the crushing silence of the cupbearer. God was not holding Joseph back from the throne. God was holding the throne back from Joseph, until Joseph was ready to sit on it. This changes how we view biblical seasons of delay. When we feel stuck, when a promise seems forgotten, our immediate assumption is that God is absent or that the plan has broken down. We think delay is denial. But in the architecture of biblical redemption, delay is often preparation. God will not put the weight of a massive calling on an untested foundation. The heavier the calling, the hotter the fire. The greater the promise, the longer the silence. Joseph had to be broken so completely that when absolute power was finally handed to him, he would not use it to crush his enemies or to elevate himself. He would use it to save the very brothers who threw him into the dry well. The prison was the only place that could forge that kind of mercy. And once you see that the dungeon was not a punishment but a necessary preparation, the moment the doors finally open makes complete sense. Because when the silence breaks, it breaks with terrifying speed. The silence holds for 2 full years. Every morning, the sun rises over Egypt, the Nile flows, the guards change their shifts, and Joseph wakes up in the dark. The preparation continues. And then, without warning, the timeline accelerates. It happens in Genesis chapter 41. The crisis does not begin in the dungeon. It begins in the palace. Pharaoh goes to sleep. And the most powerful man in the ancient world is given 2 dreams. He sees 7 ugly, thin cows eat 7 attractive, plump cows. Then he sees 7 thin, blighted ears of grain swallow up 7 plump, full ears. He wakes up, and the text says his spirit was troubled. Pharaoh does what any ancient king would do. He summons all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. This was the intellectual and spiritual elite of the empire. These men were trained to read omens, to interpret stars, and to decode the messages of the gods. But they hit a wall. Pharaoh tells them the dreams, but there is no one who can interpret them. The entire Egyptian system fails. The power of the empire is suddenly paralyzed by a mystery it cannot solve. And only then, in the tension of the royal court, does the chief cupbearer remember. He stands before Pharaoh and says, "I remember my offenses today." He tells the king about the prison. He tells him about the captain of the guard. And he tells him about a young Hebrew servant who listened to their dreams and spoke the exact truth. What happens next is one of the most dramatic shifts in biblical history. Verse 14 says, "Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon." Look at that word, hastily. In the original language, the word means to rush, to bring quickly, even to make someone run. For 13 years, Joseph's life has been moving at the painful speed of human cruelty and divine delay. He waited in the dry well in Canaan. He waited as a slave in Potiphar's house. He waited in the royal prison. His entire youth was defined by agonizing slowness. But when the divine timeline finally reaches its appointed hour, the speed is breathtaking. The waiting is over in a single morning. But notice what Joseph does. The guards rush down to get him, but Joseph does not run straight into the throne room in a panic. The text gives us a quiet, deliberate detail. Before he goes to the king, he shaved himself, changed his clothes, and came in before Pharaoh. He takes off the garments of the prison. He removes the physical marks of his captivity. He prepares himself to stand before the ruler of the known world. And then, the moment arrives. The Hebrew slave stands before the Egyptian king. The man who has spent a decade in the dark is suddenly standing in the most blindingly powerful room on earth. Pharaoh looks at him and speaks. He says, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Pause and feel the weight of that sentence. Pharaoh is offering Joseph the ultimate opportunity. "I have heard it said of you. I have heard about your talent. I have heard about your power. This is the ultimate test." Joseph is holding the key to his own rescue. He has the total attention of the man who holds the power of life and death over him. If the old Joseph were here, the 17-year-old boy who paraded his coat in front of his brothers, what would he do? He would seize the moment. He would agree with Pharaoh. He would market his gift. He would make himself the hero to secure his freedom. But notice carefully what Joseph says when he opens his mouth before the most powerful man on earth. It is a detail that proves the prison did its work. Pharaoh looks at the Hebrew slave. and offers him the ultimate temptation. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. If Joseph is the same boy we met in chapter 37, this is the moment he takes the credit. This is the moment he leans into the praise, markets his abilities, and negotiates his release. But the man standing in the throne room is not that boy anymore. Genesis chapter 41, verse 16 records his answer. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Look at the first 5 words. It is not in me. In Hebrew, the word is biladai. It carries the meaning of apart from me, or without me. Joseph looks at the king of Egypt, a man who is treated as a living god, and essentially says, I cannot do this. I am not the center of this story. I do not have the power you think I have. Think about how dangerous that answer is. Pharaoh is looking for a human expert to solve an immediate crisis. By denying that he is the expert, Joseph is risking his only chance at freedom. If Pharaoh does not like that answer, Joseph goes right back to the dungeon, or worse, to the executioner. But Joseph is no longer afraid of the dungeon, and he is no longer desperate for human approval. The fire has burned away the ego. The testing of the word has produced pure silver. The 17-year-old boy in Canaan demanded that his brothers gather around to hear about his greatness. He said, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed." The 30-year-old man in Egypt stands before the most powerful monarch on earth and says, "It is not in me." The prison worked. Joseph is finally ready to hold the weight of the promise. Because he has taken himself out of the center of the story, God speaks clearly through him. Joseph interprets the 2 dreams. He explains that they are one and the same. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will be 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. The famine will be so severe that the good years will be completely forgotten. But Joseph does not stop at interpretation. The administrator who learned how to manage Potiphar's house and the servant who learned how to organize a dark prison suddenly steps forward. He looks at Pharaoh and gives him a structural plan. He tells the king to select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. He tells him to appoint overseers, to gather 1/5 of the harvest during the good years, and to store the grain under royal guard. Notice what Joseph does not say. He does not say, "You need to hire me." He does not demand a position in the new administration. He simply lays out the blueprint for salvation and steps back. He is not grasping for power. He is acting as an instrument of divine preservation. That one sentence, "It is not in me," changes everything. The ego has been completely stripped. The pride has been dismantled. The vessel is finally ready to be poured out for the sake of the world. And that prepares us for the final payoff of the entire sequence. Pharaoh listens to the plan. He looks at his officials, and then he looks back at the 30-year-old Hebrew standing in front of him. Pharaoh says, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command." Notice what just happened. Pharaoh does not praise Joseph's intellect. He does not praise his magic. He explicitly names the God of Joseph. Why? Because Joseph refused to take the credit. By stepping out of the center, Joseph allowed the power of God to be visible in the most powerful pagan court in the ancient world. Then, Pharaoh takes his signet ring from his hand and puts it on Joseph's hand. He clothes him in garments of fine linen. He puts a gold chain around his neck. Look at the profound reversal of the imagery. In Canaan, his brothers stripped him of his special coat. In Egypt, Pharaoh clothes him in royal linen. In the dungeon, the psalm says his neck was placed in an iron collar. In the palace, his neck is wrapped in a chain of gold. He was thrown into a dark, stationary pit. Now, Pharaoh makes him ride in his second chariot, and they call out before him, "Bow the knee." The visual restoration is complete. But the man wearing the linen is not the boy who wore the coat. The boy with the coat would have used this massive power for revenge. The man in the linen will use it to save the world. And this is where the entire sequence comes into final focus. This is where we see why the darkest chapter of Joseph's life was absolutely necessary. When the famine eventually strikes, it does not just hit Egypt, it hits Canaan. It hits the family of Jacob. It hits the very brothers who threw Joseph into the dry well 13 years earlier. If God had not sent Joseph ahead, if God had not refined him in the dark, tested his character, and placed him on the throne, the family of Jacob would have starved to death in the desert. And if the family of Jacob starves, the 12 tribes of Israel die before they even become a nation. But the stakes are even higher than that. The central promise God made to Abraham was that through his family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Through this specific family line, the Messiah would eventually come. The survival of the world's ultimate redemption was tied directly to the survival of Jacob's family. If the famine wipes them out, the lineage of Jesus stops in Canaan. God was not merely trying to secure a comfortable government job for Joseph. God was aggressively and deliberately moving the pieces of history to preserve the seed of the woman. God was protecting the eternal covenant, and the mechanism he used to protect that covenant was the suffering of one man in an Egyptian cell. When we read the story of Joseph, we love the original dreams. We love the chariot. We love the dramatic reunion with his family at the end. But the salvation of Israel did not happen because Joseph was a gifted teenager. It happened because he submitted to the silence. It happened because he allowed the agonizing delay of the prison to burn away his pride until he was hollowed out enough to hold the salvation of his people. The silence was not an accident. The delay was not a denial. The forgotten dreams were not a failure of God's plan. They were the exact machinery moving the promise forward. The prison was never just a prison. It was the quiet forge of redemption. If this study helped you see the story of Joseph with fresh eyes, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue uncovering the deeper patterns of Scripture together.